I request you to please come stand here for the photographs?
Well, it's my privilege to launch this book by Pravin Sawhney. He was reminding me that we met last in Chandigarh many, many years ago when he was the ADC to Siddharth Shankar Ray, the then governor, and I think it was under president's rule in Chandigarh. Anyway, it's lovely to meet you again. I have been through part of this book, and I'd just like to make a couple of comments, and maybe later on Pravin can answer them. One is that this book paints a pretty gloomy picture of India and China relations. And the opening chapter has a very scary scenario, in the future, of course, of a war between India and China. And I think, Pravin, if I'm not wrong, you feel that a war is inevitable between India and China.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I am of the opinion that both India and China, they are inching towards a war. And this will not be a skirmish. It will be a war, a decisive war, a war of occupation, because Xi Jinping has repeatedly said that he needs to reclaim territories. There are only two territories which need to be reclaimed. One is Taiwan and the second is Tibet. As we all know, Arunachal Pradesh is what they call South Tibet. And when he says gloomy, of course it should be a wake-up call, although it is very late in the day. Because as I was telling Rahul, that the reason for this is, why it's a gloomy scenario, because all these 60, 65 years, the Indian military, they kept their sights low on Pakistan. It was always Pakistan, Pakistan, the enemy, and remains so even today. Whereas the Chinese kept the sights high, they were always looking how to compete and outcompete the US military, and hence there is a gap of nearly 30 years.
No, before I leave the stage to the other two who are coming, I'd just like to ask you one question which I don't think is dealt with in your book. And it goes back to the axiom that democracies never go to war against each other. And I'm putting this thought in your mind that one thing that you've missed out here is the growing force of democracy in China. It might not be very strong, but I think in the next 2 or 3 years, I think those forces of democracy are going to get stronger and stronger. Is that a factor which, because I'm more of an optimist than you are, and I feel that as China, the forces of democracy get stronger, I don't think the Chinese thinking will remain the same. I'll leave it at that, and maybe you could answer that when the other two come in. I'll go off to the...
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Singh.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Sunday afternoon. I agree with you, all of those who are here, that the cricket isn't that interesting as it was promised to be on a Sunday. And in a city where it takes longer to reach the venue than to conduct a session, I think I can promise you that we'll have a pulsating, scintillating session with two fine panelists that we have here. Without much ado, let me talk about the subject a little bit. India, China. Well, the two countries who started their journeys at almost a similar time in history. 1 year adrift of each other, they turned republics, 49 and 50. They've had similar journeys. They've had, a journey full of conflicts, more of conflicts out of the 4 C's that Manoj Joshi writes in his book, conflict, cooperation, containment, are the 3. So, has been full of conflicts. 1962, the war. 67, 2 battles, a skirmish in 2020, many standoffs in between. We are still at a space and place where that relationship is testy and the future is uncertain. So we have Manoj Joshi and Pravin Sawhney with us. They've already been introduced. I will start off with a question for you, Manoj. You have spoken about, you start your book with the chapter on Galwan, which is an interesting one. You talk about, and that's what makes the book quite different. My question to you is the Galwan incident of 2020 the inflection point, or in India-China relations, or because it kind of threw out of the window the BPTAs and the other things that were there existing, the CBMs and the confidence building measures, etc. Or it was the outcome of a continuing set of inflection points, which is China's rise as far as as an economic power, or and also the rise of Xi Jinping in 2013, after which we've seen more standoffs than in the earlier decades. What, according to you, has been the inflection point, or are we still yet to arrive at one?
Well, I think that 2020 Galwan was the inflection point for the simple reason that 20 Jawans died, and a commanding officer, they died in that incident. The previous incident in which people had died was 1975. So, but having said that, I'd also like to say that I think it was a situation that went out of control. So it was not something which was planned in that way, but because this happened, it became the inflection point, and the inflection point was one where our relationship went from what you would call competitive coexistence, competitive coexistence to the present situation, where there is an uneasy coexistence, particularly with the western borders concerned. Many things are still up in the air, relationships up in the air, and that was the point, and as Pravin has made this point earlier also, when India transferred one of its strike corps, which was facing Pakistan, to now face China. Meaning people had been saying that you should do this for 20, 30 years, the army had not paid attention. But finally, when this happened, Galwan happened, then the army officially shifted the orientation of that corps towards China. So in that sense, I would say, yes, it was the inflection point.
Right. Thank you. Pravin, the next question to you. You've already answered the question that I was meaning to ask you, and Rahul asked you that question. So that's the strategic side of my question. My question is now a little more tactical in terms of what has happened and what has transpired in the last 6-7 years, especially Doklam in 2017. You write about Doklam in your book, and you talk about how the Indian government, the Indian army, misread Chinese actions. You've also spoken about the continued, and you spoke about it earlier when you were speaking with Rahul, that we've been preparing for the wrong war. Where do you think, that's the larger picture. We prepared for the wrong war is what you say. What, in your opinion, is in the last 6 or 8 years has been the turning point as far as the Indian thinking is concerned? Is that Doklam, or is it somewhere else before that we need to address?
Very interesting. Actually, you've not asked tactical question. You asked what we call the operational questions.
Yeah.
Let me start with very briefly with the Doklam. Doklam, I think not only the Indian government, the analysts, all the analysts, sorry saying so, they got it completely wrong. Why they got it wrong is because the first thing that should have struck everybody is that PLA, why would it want to get its people killed? By getting them into that funnel Chumbi Valley, where all the heights are dominated by the Indian soldiers. They could not be fools, number one. Number two, when they have standoff weapons, when they today have a capability for 24/7 situation awareness, or what we call complete transparency of the battle space, why do they want to come to that hillock, that Jampheri ridge, to see what is happening on the Siliguri corridor? They in any case see everything. So you see, this was completely missed. Now when you sit back and think, and of course there is a reason why I'm saying this is the way it happened, but that is going into details of Doklam. The Chinese had a problem. Their problem was that, look, they had done their good border management, starting from 1993 onwards, when Narasimha Rao signed the 1993 agreement, and for the first time, line of actual control was created. Mind you, this is the first instance in military history where a military line of actual control has been created for peace. Normally you create military lines after a war. It was created for peace. That means our diplomats simply didn't understand the significance of the line of actual control. Thereafter, all the intrusions and the transgressions of the Chinese started because they started strengthening their border management. So that was one thing. Now, the problem here was that in 96, an agreement was signed between the two sides. Now, that is the time Chinese were not thinking that far. So the agreement clearly said that, look, not more than so many troops, very little troops, some 3,000, 5,000 troops on either side. If you want to increase the troops, then you need consent of both sides. Now, if they were to bring, after they did the 2015 reforms and they created the Western Theatre Command, in a command, as you know, there are thousands and thousands of troops. They had to be brought to the command. What good is a command if there are no soldiers there? So now and the problem with the Chinese is, Chinese say that we never attack. We always fight in self-defense. We are not aggressors, ever. This is their position. And they want to maintain that position also. So they came up with this brilliant plan. And the plan was, let us start a problem at a place where the Indian government, and they had read Modi. They had read Modi, that Modi, as far as he is concerned, national security is the USP of this government. So they are happy with the perception management. They had read that, absolutely correct. So now what they did is, they started this problem. And obviously here, what they expected happened. We started sending our troops there. Now when we started sending our troops, they also started sending their troops in self-defense. More troops from this side, more troops from that side. Finally, when they realized that, look, it's good now, so the 13 rounds of peace talk, everything settled. Now, our troops came back. They never went back. Why? Because they said, this is our territory. We'll be here. So see how cleverly they got the troops there. Not only they got it there, starting 2018, if you recall, infrastructure building started and training started. The significance of training is that this is what is called artificial intelligence. You get the data. Then you train that data for the machines and the robots. So that is what they started, and that is where today they are here. Now, you speak of the inflection point. First of all, in my opinion, assessment, Galwan was in fact, there was a lesson to be learnt in Galwan, which was not learnt at all. And the lesson is, please understand, the PLA was doing this Galwan in what is called a grey zone operation. Not a single shot was fired, which means that this was below the level of war. Chinese never wanted to go to war. This is not the time they want to go to war. So they were prepared for this Galwan. And which is why, in fact, some analysts have written some thousands of our soldiers, they were captured. Not 10 really, but that is another story. So they got the best out of the event with those swords and stones and all those primitive, what we call the unconventional weapons. They never fired a thing. Now, if the Indian government was thinking here, it should have occurred to them that this guy does not want war. But here the opposite thing happened. On the 19th June, 15th June 2020, Galwan happened. 19th, the Prime Minister said, koi ghusa nahi hai, koi aaya nahi hai. So they knew that the guy he's buckled down under pressure. Which is why, if you read please, September 10 Agreement 2020. This was signed in Moscow between Wang Yi and Jai Shankar, the two foreign ministers, which clearly lays down all the terms of peace which the Chinese want. And that is where they are. So it was an inflection point in the sense, this was a moment for us to understand that, look, what is happening even today, for the last 2.5 years, all this is below the threshold of war. This is not where they will fight the war. they will fight a different war, and for that, you have to see how they are competing with the US military. Thank you.
Thank you. Taking a cue from what Pravin said, that they were actually we were caught off guard in Galwan. My question here is that which is again leading from your book too, that you talk about 3 instances, or rather 2, and then Modi's instance in 2015-16, when China and India have come close to certain kind of resolution. And you talk about the Rajiv Gandhi years, for instance, which led to the 1993, the BPTA. You also talk about the 2003 Vajpayee trip, which you were closely associated with as well. And then 2015-16, when there was an outreach after the Prime Minister came to power some time back. So, and you also talk about the fact that, look, there have been, the Chinese have been shifting goalposts right through. So to Pravin's point, that, we have read it wrongly, how far would that be true, given the fact that, China has been shifting goalposts every time, and every time there is a new issue that comes up. We spoke a short while ago about, how China used to earlier talk about northern Bhutan, the Pasarlong side, and now they talk about the Sakteng sanctuary, which is again an indication that they want to reopen the debate about Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh. So when we are talking about resolving issues with China or understanding them well, do they really want us to understand them well? Because one of the points is that, look, do they want a line of actual control which is peaceful? Because they want to leverage off a kind of border or line of control, which is line of actual control, which is fraught with these kinds of occasional disputes, incursions, etc. It suits them. So, how do we trust China in terms of their or how do we anticipate what kind of moves and thoughts that they would have, given the fact that in the past these things have occurred, and there's been a constant shifting of goalposts and a trust deficit that goes back for decades. Is that something whose blame could be laid at India's door?
Well, you see, I think if you're looking at blame, blame can be laid at India's doors in the 1950s, when there was occasion to settle the dispute, when the Indians said there is no dispute. Now, when 2 countries, new republics have come up, with no accepted border, so the common sense suggests that the 2 countries sit down and negotiate a border. But the Indian side said that there is no dispute. We know where the border is. Now the Chinese are turning around and doing the same to us today. See, the thing is that the 1993 Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement was an effort to say that in this line of actual control, there are some points where there is an overlap. The Indians say that this is the border. The Chinese say that is the border. And so there are 18 or 20 points where you have this, where they say there, we say there, so in between we patrol. This area in between, sometimes it's 10 square kilometers, sometimes it's, in the case of Tepsang, it's 800, 900 square kilometers, but we used to patrol this. So what happened in 2020 was that in 5 places in eastern Ladakh, the Chinese came and stood at where we claim our border and said, and have prevented us from patrolling. Now you can call it that they have occupied a territory, and the settlement that we have done with them since then is to declare this a no patrol zone. In 3 of those areas, we have mutually agreed that this will be a no patrol zone, but almost everyone agrees that that no patrol zone lies heavier on the Indian side than the Chinese. So this was an attempt to resolve the border. Now you come to the Vajpayee period. So when Mr. Vajpayee went to Beijing, he told the Chinese, he said, look, we have been trying to resolve this border issue, pulling out maps from the 19th century and going through all that in detail, arguing with each other. Let us now simply settle this border on as a political bargain. So we'll make a political bargain on this border. And political bargain, I think if you look at the border today, most people will agree that it will be an as-is, where-is kind of a situation. India is not going to be able to physically occupy Aksai Chin. The Chinese will not be able to occupy Arunachal Pradesh. So Vajpayee ji said, let us have this political bargain, and they appointed special representatives. So his senior most officer, Brajesh Mishra, was India's special representative, and the Chinese appointed Dai Bingguo. Now, since then, there have been Mr. Brajesh Mishra, once, since he has passed away, I can disclose this, he once told me that they had expected to settle this border within 3 years. But you know what happened? Mr. Vajpayee lost the election. And there have been 22 rounds of talks between the special representatives. Now, the thing is, actually, they have worked out a framework. Both the Indians and the Chinese have worked out a framework. The problem is in getting the political leadership on board, both in Beijing and in India. Now, behind this is the question, do the Chinese want to settle this border? Now, there is a question mark, because when the Chinese agreed on this 1993 agreement, India and China were roughly at the same level. Meaning, in fact, our technology was slightly better than that of the Chinese. GDP was roughly similar. But by 2010, the Chinese were way ahead of us. 5 times, the GDP was 5 times more. Defense spending, enormous. Today, they spend $250 billion. We spend $80 billion. You see, so when the Chinese look at us now, they say these Indians, meaning this is an inferior power. And the Chinese, they have a very sharpened sense, their sense of international relations is very hierarchical. So you have the Middle Kingdom on top, and the Middle Kingdom only recognizes the United States as an equal.
Right. Yes.
And everyone else, this thing. So what they say is that India should recognize its place in the order of things, and it'll settle the border.
Yes. So just a quick question leading from what you've said. China believes it's the center of the earth, heavens under the sky, and all of that. The mid-kingdom theory kicks in, given that, that's happened especially after 2013. But just to flip it a little bit, at that point of time, the economies were roughly similar, as you said. Now, there would be the other differences. But you mentioned about the political solution to this entire dispute. We have a situation where you have strong leaders on both sides in terms of their, in terms of the kind of the popularity, or the kind of the strength that they have in terms of their political decision-making capabilities. Do you think that, given now that Xi Jinping has also been voted for a 3rd term, and India is going to elections in 2024, the outcome of which, if it were to have a strong leader, do you think there is a possibility going forward to revisit certain areas which could bring India and China to the discussion table to resolving these issues, and going back to the 1960 Zhou Enlai proposal of Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh, given that they have already got infrastructure in Aksai Chin, and Arunachal Pradesh has been with India in every which way. So, is there a possibility? I know it is a question from the viewpoint of a devil's advocate, but how do you look at that?
Well, the thing is that the border itself, particularly in Ladakh, there's nothing of value there.
Yeah.
Okay, there are large parts of it, there are no people, even people don't live there. You see? So the border itself is not the issue. It is the political use that is being made of the border. In the sense, today, border, or the problems that arise in the border are basically related to keeping India down in South Asia. In the sense that the Chinese say that we don't recognize India to be the dominant country in South Asia. And that is, in turn, is linked to China's desire to be seen as the dominant Asian power. Now, you can't be a dominant Asian power if you have India sitting here, and on the other side, you have the United States sitting there. Now, United States is a more tougher nut to crack. So, it's easier to crack this nut here. And that is where I think where Pravin's book comes in, that the danger is that they might find that they might realize that this is an easier nut to crack, the Indian nut, and another repeat of 1962 would be devastating, for this country. So definitely there's a danger there, but whether in terms of settling the issue, that's not a problem. This issue, as I told you, the special representatives have worked out the principles, the framework. They've all have been worked out. That where there will be watershed, how there will be river issues, how tri-junctions will be dealt with, all those details have been worked out. But they need the go-ahead of the political principles.
Right. So, Pravin, a question for you, connected to what Manoj said. I'll put it slightly differently. You've talked about India joining the BRI line. You talked about how, and again, I'm looking at how do we move forward from here. And you've said, that's one way we look at BRI as a possible, segue into detent going to the future. But if I were to step back and look at BRI and the kind of countries who have been involved, over 150 countries, out of which 10%, if I have the numbers right, 10% were those 10 years back who had certain distress in terms of their economy. And now that number of 10% has risen to 70%, which means out of those 70%, 40% of those countries have run into issues of addressing their debt because of the Chinese loans that they've had. Now, when you recommend that BRI is the way out, and also we have seen where the turmoil, the economic turmoil that Pakistan is going through, the Sri Lankan economic turmoil. Recently, the Bangladeshi finance minister actually spoke out aloud in the media saying that Chinese loans have had a deleterious effect on some of these nations that have borrowed. Why would in India, with its growing economy, choose to join the BRI just to assuage the Chinese? And is that something that is viable in the current ecosystem that we have?
Yeah, a couple of things as a bullet point, because there's so much to cover.
Right.
So let me just give them as
Sure.
bullet points. First of all, this Belt and Road initiative that you're talking about, it's an evolving and a dynamic concept. When I say that, in phase one, which is what will finish now, the phase one was the land corridor and the maritime corridor, maritime Silk Road. Now we are looking at phase 2 and phase 3, which is the digital, hard and soft cyber connectivity. Now we are looking at cyber connectivity, we are looking at subsea cables for the third part. In other words, the third and the fourth phase of the cyber connectivity phase of China will deliver the third and the fourth industrial revolution to the people who are on board the BRI. This is a very big thing. Now, another point about Ladakh now. Ladakh, why it is important is because, as rightly we say, that the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is the flagship of the BRI, it passes through Gilgit-Baltistan. Now they are making it into a twin road. So that is important. They are not bothered about what India thinks about this CPEC. CPEC is a flagship. Pakistan Prime Minister was recently in China, and Xi Jinping, this is what the report said. Now they are looking at connecting it to the Central Asian republics, taking it to the Afghanistan, and also taking it to the East African continent through the subsea cable which are being built by China and Pakistan. So that is the significance of Ladakh. Now coming to, sorry, you said another point you made about
joining the BRI, and why would
BRI.
India join the BRI?
See, the point is that Chinese do not want to go to war with India, period. Why they don't want to go with war with India is China has done something which has never been done in the military history of the world. And that is a rise of a nation happening not through military means, but by offering prosperity to nations. And this is what this whole concept of BRI is all about. It offers what is called prosperity through the digital Silk Road, and it offers common security. cooperative security, what they call. Again, a big thing which I have dealt with, what this means in the book. So this has never happened before. They talk of a peaceful rise. So what they are looking at is not a physical occupation of any country. What they are looking at is that once the fourth industrial revolution comes, artificial intelligence comes there, and this will all happen in this decade. We are fortunate to be living in a decisive decade. This is that. So when that all comes, they will set the standards for that. That means they will always have a first mover advantage in their trade, in their prosperity. What they are looking at the end of the day is not a physical occupation of, let's say, India or Bangladesh or this or that. They are looking that when Bangladesh makes it foreign policy, Bangladesh should give deference to China opinion. What China thinks should matter in Bangladesh foreign policy, this is what they want, the Chinese want. And this is precisely where the Americans have been left behind. Because Americans, right until the China happened here in Asia Pacific region, everything was built on hard military power, what they call deterrence. Now here is a country which is playing to its strength, not on the strength of the Americans. They know that they cannot match Americans today in the military domain. So what these guys do is they go and start offering prosperity to nation. Now tell me which nation will deny prosperity? On top of that, if you see what has come out of the 20th Congress, National Congress, so the simple thing, no, I'll just wrap it up. This is a big subject.
Sure. Yeah.
So the big thing that has come out is Xi Jinping, amongst the various things that he has told the PLA to do, one, of course, he has said you prepare for the regional war and be prepared till 2027. There are two regional wars, Taiwan and Tibet. The other thing what he has said is that PLA should have a normal relations, a normal tasking. Now what he means is that all the assets of India or of China, which through the BRI, its people, its infrastructure, its interest, they will be protected by the PLA. Now look at a scenario. India is not on the BRI, Bhutan is too small, I don't even want to talk about it. Rest the entire South Asia is on board BRI. Now we'll have all these in the next 5-6 years, PLA soldiers mucking around, looking after their interest and looking after their infrastructure in Bangladesh, Nepal, this, that, you see, and we are surrounded by all.
So sorry to interject.
Yeah.
One quick question I have here, and it'd be good to get a brief reply from you. In terms of most of the borrowing nations, if you look at them, they're ruled by dictators, authoritarian governments, or leaders who could be bribed through. So China has taken that route. Whether you look at Maldives or you look at meddling in Nepal, there is political corruption in many of these countries, which when the governments change, they have faced these issues while returning these loans. There is no creditworthiness, understood of these nations because some of these terms are quite hazy and blurry. And so the foreign, the IMF and the other institutions aren't able to figure out what is the, kind of creditworthiness these nations have, the borrowing nations. What I'm trying to also point out to is that also a strategy to dominate the international institutions? Because what you do is when you give loans to these countries, they're on your side. So when you have to move a motion in the United Nations and elsewhere, you have a bunch of nations who you're able to pull through onto your side, and you can influence the international institutions. Talking about how the US, like you said, the US hasn't been able to influence. Is that a subterfuge route that China has adopted to influence international institutions and thereby, find its place in the center of the earth?
I don't think so. There are two issues here. Issue number one is that nobody will give you money loan unless you don't want it. China is not going to this country or that country ki humse paise le lo. You guys are coming to China, asking for it, and you sign on the terms and conditions. Now, whether it's a autocracy, whether it's a democracy, let's not get into that. It's a separate debate altogether. So you sign on the thing. That is one. You see? And what is very clear, if you see all the figures, what these countries get from, why don't they go to the World Bank, to the IMF? Because there, they ask you to do so many other things. Issues like human rights also come in. You see, your regulations have to be changed. The Chinese don't question anything.
Which are
They
over
say,
the table, basically,
"Le
those
jao,
ones.
le jao." And this is the terms. That is point number one.
Yeah.
Point number two is, see, two countries have actually, no, I'm actually telling you because it's an eye-opening research done by two scholars of Stanford, which I have quoted in my book in the that cooperative security chapter. Please read that.
Sure.
It's worth reading.
Yeah.
There are only, this is all information war, propaganda,
Yeah.
done by the Americans.
Not the Chinese.
No. It's done by the Americans, and Indians obviously are too happy to be part of that.
Right.
You see? So, but again, the bottom line here is, वो जबरदस्ती थोड़ा ना कर रहा है भाई. So when you,
Yes.
it all sounds like, that they are pressurizing you. You take this, otherwise, all right, don't build your railroad here. Don't
Right.
build this,
Right.
don't build that.
Right.
So,
But no, thank you. I mean, I also do understand that China spends 10 billion in information warfare outside.
no, they all
and
do.
it's-
All do.
All of
It's
them do.
become very critical.
Sure.
You see,
Sure.
it's happening in Ukraine on
Sure.
a daily
Sure.
basis.
Sure.
Russians are doing, the Americans
Yeah,
are doing,
yeah,
everybody is doing.
yeah. Quick question to you, Manoj, before we go to the Q&A session. Given that, it is a very different kind of a scenario, an ecosystem that we have, where, unlike the past, and you've spoken about how it's a tentative peace and there is a prospect of war, will a war or will any kind of an engagement tomorrow or today have these other multiple stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific being the theater, and you have Taiwan, and you have, which Pravin speaks about, the Chinese, point about Taiwan, and Taiwan being one of the things in the plans. So you have Taiwan, and you have the other players, Japan and Korea, and you have India, you have the Quad, you have the United States, which looks up, and you've said that India is looked at by the US as their go-to country in the region, because that's the only country that can look China in the eye. So, and China has its allies in the neighborhood, which I call the surrogate warfare as far as India and China are concerned. Where do you see this going in terms of the larger ecosystem? Do you see India playing a larger role insofar as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, or do you see India, being confined?
I think very simple that when it comes to the Sino-Indian border,
Right.
I don't think any external power is going to help us. We've got sufficient. There's no shortage of men. We are well entrenched in our positions. We are strengthening some of those positions. We don't really need external assistance there. Now it comes to the naval point. We are already hard put, meaning, our Navy has reduced its the numbers. Earlier they said 180 ship Navy by 2027. Now they have come down to, I think, 140 ships. So we are already hard put from the naval point of view. At the end of the day, people talk about Indo-Pacific. I don't see Indian ships playing a major military role in the Pacific Ocean. So I think the United States and our friends and partners there, they would be perfectly happy if India becomes stronger where it is. Meaning a strong India with a strong position in the Indian Ocean is really what is really in their wish list. I don't think, the US Navy doesn't really need Indian Navy, even 10 ships, 20 ships of the Indian Navy to help them in the Pacific Ocean. So what they want is that India itself per se should become stronger, and a stronger India itself will play a role in balancing China.
Right. Quick question to you, Pravin, before we go to the Q&A. We have a couple of minutes. One of the key aspects of your book, and in the interest of time, I wanted to ask you a lot more about it. Given that, you talk about the AI and you talk about the progress and the kinetic warfare, etc. What we have seen in Ukraine war, and you've written about it separately, I would still ask you that, in the first half of the war, it was believed that, the Russian cyber strength and technology and would dismantle the infrastructure and the defensive mechanism of Ukraine, which kind of initially, a lot of analysts spoke about it. But the war has dragged on. and we come down to the ground warfare, to the artillery, to the missiles, to the tank battles. Where does all of this, does it change the way you think now after the Ukraine war, and why not?
Yeah. See, Ukraine war is not the right example, and I'll tell you why. In Ukraine, the Russians are not fighting Ukrainians. They are fighting the US military and NATO. They are fighting by proxy there. Please recall in 2008 at the NATO summit in Bucharest, that is the time, for the first time, the NATO said that Ukraine and Georgia should be part of NATO, and Putin objected vehemently at that time that I will not accept, this is existential threat. The NATO will be on my borders, I reject this completely, he said. Then, starting 2014, every year they've been training, the Ukrainians have been training with the NATO soldiers, everybody knows this. So here you have the fodder Ukrainians having trained with the NATO forces, NATO Americans supplying the equipment, and Russia is on the other side. This is one part. The second part is recall on 24th of January, when Putin started this whole thing, he called it a special military operation. Now there's a big difference between special military operation and war. And the big difference is, in war, you play by your strength, your complete strength. For example, if tomorrow there is a war between India and China, China will play in 7 domains of war against India's 3 domains, land, air, and sea. They will play land, air, and sea. In fact, they won't even play here. It will be electromagnetic spectrum, cyberspace, it will be outer space, and it will be near space. This is their strength. Now, going back to the question on Ukraine. So they started as a special military operation. Where Putin got it completely wrong is the amount of backing and the determination that NATO and US had to make Russia weak. That is where his generals got it wrong. He replaced the general. Now what is going on is, now they are using only missiles, something that they did not want to use earlier, destroying the infrastructure, the power, the buildings, the hospitals, they are being targeted.
Right.
So this is not a right example, because I hear a lot of our generals talking about that, you see, this war, lessons for India. No lessons for India, for God's sake.
But you don't believe this is an accelerated disruptor and not a game changer, AI? Not yet. We could get there in time.
No, it is a game changer. No, AI is today. AI is right here. Please see the YouTubes of the PLA, see the YouTubes of the Americans which is coming out, the robots which are coming out. This is all now. It's happening.
Right.
You see?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pravin and Manoj. And we now throw it open to the audience for questions. Yes, please.
Thank you for that very interesting discussion. My name is Josh. Sir, just now you mentioned things like near space battles and the electromagnetic spectrums which will be used in the cyber war which will be waged. Can you talk a little more about that? And I have a hypothetical for anyone who wants to take it up. If India's GDP was roughly equivalent to China's, what would the world look like? Because in my mind, I think the biggest problem is that we simply cannot fund our military the way that they can. So the reason that they have a 7-front war and we have a 3-front war is because we don't have money for the 7-front war. So in the long term, we want the economies to be roughly equivalent and ours to be higher. If that was already the case, what would the military situation look like? And talk a little bit more about these exotic new fronts of war. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I, sir, one of the 2 questions so that the others
I'll
get
take the first one, then the second.
yes, so that the others get a chance.
Because
as well.
the first
Sure.
one is about
Yes.
first of all, there's nothing exotic about it. It's been there since 2010, at least. It's only that we have been oblivious about all what was happening in China as well as US and around the world. Now, the altitude from ground to outer space is 100 kilometers. All your flights, your commercial flights, they all are within the distance of 20 kilometers from the ground. That is it. So from 20 kilometers to 100 kilometers is what is called the near space. Beyond that is the outer space. Now, electromagnetic spectrum. All of us are sitting here because of light. If there was no light, if there would be darkness, we would not be able to work. So what is electromagnetic spectrum? It has 7 waves, starting with the radio wave, microwave, then you have infrared wave, then you have light wave, then you have ultraviolet ray, X-ray, gamma ray. These are the rays. You see? So without these rays and without a mastery and management of these, you cannot today fight a war. What this means is that all your communications happen on the radio wave frequencies. If somebody could jam those frequencies, had the capability to jam all your bands and had the capability of management on those 7 this thing, and he could open something else. You see? So that is the significance which is completely lost on the Indian military. And the last what you said is cyber. Increased digitization. Cyber is what is happening between your computers, information war. You see, the information part. You see, because of digitization, that thing is called the cyberspace. If you insert a virus there, it goes right up till the satellite. Because even the communication from the ground to the satellite is because of electronics. Electronic means the virus goes there. I strongly recommend, Jay, you read this book. Thank you.
Right. The next question. Yes. Here. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you would have taken up in this book. There was a very recent instance when China could have done a lot, but it sort of came back from that. That's Taiwan, Nancy Pelosi's visit, a lot of saber rattling, and it was as if a war will break out and China will do whatever it is to be done. In fact, there was strong...
Can you stick to the question, sir?
Yeah,
we
so
don't
the question
have
is,
time.
Question is,
What is the question?
Since Mr. Sawhney says, though we are not to go on war and China is what it is and Taiwan and India being the 2 regions, so if it backed off from there, why do you think it will indulge with or engage or disengage or have a aggressive posture with India?
No, what is the connection between Taiwan and India? What is the connection you are making?
With Taiwan also it has the same kind of a border problem. With India also there is a border issue.
Okay, I think I generally got it. Now, you see, Taiwan is a different case. Why Taiwan is a different case is Joe Biden has publicly said that we will support Taiwan. And one of the big reasons they will support Taiwan is Taiwan has, you may know, something called the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is the largest fabrication manufacturers of chips in the world. And chips is the new oil because chips are the bottom line of your artificial intelligence. They will do the processing for you. Now, when this speaker went there, the problem here is, please, I'll just take 1 minute to explain him. Think it another way. What everybody thinks, don't think, try and think that way, you'll get the answers correct. It is like this, that right from when Joe Biden came into office, they have been trying to check. They have been trying that Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, meet up with the number 2 or the number 3 man of the Central Military Commission. And they have been refusing. The Chinese refuse. They say, no, he is not your equivalent. You meet with our defense minister. Defense minister in their dispensation is an honorary job, a ceremonial job. It has no operational role. What the Americans are trying to find out is where exactly are their red lines for war. Below war is the gray zone operation. That is the whole problem they are trying to find out. Because they know that they do not want to go to war. Neither Americans will go to war, nor they will go to war in Taiwan. I'm talking specific to that theater. Because there they have built what is called anti-access area denial capabilities, which is massive. Why neither side will go to war is because neither is confident of winning. Now, if you are not confident of winning, that means you are not confident of achieving your military objectives. Why do you go to war? Our case is different, entirely different. But I'll stop here.
I'll just quickly go to Akash. You have a question? I maybe have a couple of questions at the end, just quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Very interesting discussion. Quick one. From this discussion, I don't see any agency given to India. We always seem to be on the back foot. So is there anything we can do? Can we be a bit more proactive? What would you suggest? What's the way forward?
Start thinking unlike the others.
Manoj, why don't you take that on?
You know, the thing is, that we have a large pool of information technology talent. Okay, if we have this large pool, but it's a kind of a diffuse pool. I mean, somewhere people in Bangalore, Pune, Mumbai, here, there. We can begin by discreetly creating. See, this is what the Ukrainians did in 2014. In 2014, they created an NGO. The NGO was involved in cyber activity. In 2017, that NGO was incorporated into the Ukrainian military. And so therefore, when this war began, it began with the Russians first knocking out the Ukrainian military communications. It was a satellite, it was the Western satellites, but they knocked it out. But what they were surprised was by the strength of what the Ukrainians had done. So in the sense, they had, from 2014, they had prepared. And Ukraine is the weaker party, just like we are the weaker party with China. So it's not an impossible situation, but you have to have someone taking the initiative. See, our political leaders are great at, exhorting and saying, ye kar denge, wo kar denge, but, they don't do the practical stuff. And this is, in part, what is called all-domain warfare. We're talking of various domains. So this is a cyber domain. But who is in charge of cyber domain? So mainly we are doing defensive stuff, protecting this thing. So we have one organization here who's doing it, one organization there. But who knits together? Who can knit together our enormous army of talent? If you can do that, so you can respond. Meaning that I just want to give you this thing. I can.
Sure. Well, thank you. I don't think we have time for any more questions. Unfortunately, I see a lot of hands, but I wish I could go to you. I'll just wrap up this discussion here. Thank you very much, Pravin and Manoj, and thank you all for this wonderful, discussion here. The last thought I have is what Manoj writes in his book about cooperation in an antagonistic world, which you quote Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon. I think that's what we are in for. Whether we are in for a full-fledged war, we'll know, but, someone asked about India's capabilities, and, that's a good way to end it. I think there is a room for improvement. Pravin talks about what we must do. Manoj has been recommending that as well. So thank you very much for a wonderful afternoon, and hope you have a great evening, a great Sunday. Thank you.